I picked up the divorce papers, my fingers trembling, and still couldn't believe the story I was living. It felt surreal, like a twisted plot line in a noir film. I had never encountered a woman as cunning as Adriana, and the more I tried to make sense of her motives, the more they slipped through my fingers. Was she trying to build a kingdom of men like some modern-day Cleopatra? Or was I just another fool in her elaborate game? I'll start at the beginning because, trust me, this is a million-dollar story. You've never heard anything like it. It all began when I found myself sitting at an airport bar, drowning my boredom in a whiskey poured into a flimsy plastic cup. I'd been staring at the departure board for so long that the letters started to blur as if they might spell out some deeper truth about my life. That's when she walked in. Adriana. She didn't just enter the room, she owned it. Her flight attendant uniform was pressed to perfection, the red scarf around her neck tied with mathematical precision. But it was her lipstick that caught my attention first, red as blood, sharp as a knife. She sat down beside me, flashing a smile that could melt glaciers. "Missed your flight?" she asked, her voice smooth and honeyed. "No, just waiting on mine," I said, fighting the nervous hitch in my voice. It had been 6 months since my divorce, and I hadn't even attempted to flirt with anyone, let alone someone who looked like she belonged on the cover of a travel magazine. Adriana leaned in closer, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "I can always spot the ones who need an escape. It's part of the job." And that was how it started. She was magnetic. Everything about her pulled me in, from the way she spoke 5 languages fluently, to the stories she told about rooftop dinners in Tokyo and private parties in Dubai. She made my small-town life as a finance guy seem downright prehistoric. I fell hard, faster than I wanted to admit. Within a year, we were married. It felt like a dream, until the cracks began to show. Adriana had a habit of vanishing. At first, it was easy to rationalize. She was a flight attendant, after all. Disappearing for days was part of the job. But then the personal trips started piling up. Trips she insisted were necessary for her mental health. I wanted to trust her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the phone calls she wouldn't take in front of me, the cryptic text messages, the hotel charges in cities she never mentioned, I tried to brush it off as paranoia. Until I found the postcard. It was buried at the bottom of a drawer she rarely used. The handwriting was elegant, the words written in Portuguese. My Portuguese was non-existent, but Google Translate was more than happy to fill in the blanks. "Can't wait to see you again, meu amor. Last night was unforgettable. Te amo. Luis." Luis? Who the hell was Luis? I confronted her that night expecting tears, apologies, explanations, anything. Instead, she just sighed like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Luis is an old friend, it's nothing." But it wasn't nothing, and Luis wasn't the only one. One night, while Adriana was working, I received a phone call from a man with a heavy Polish accent. He introduced himself as her husband. Yes, her husband, and demanded to speak with her. He begged her to come back home to Poland. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. But as I dug deeper, the truth unraveled like a thread pulled loose from a tapestry. Adriana wasn't just living a double life, she was living multiple lives. She wasn't a flight attendant. That was just another costume she wore. She was a chameleon, adapting to whatever persona fit the moment. Poland, Portugal, Dubai. I traced her movements like a detective piecing together a crime scene. And the men? I lost count. I wasn't her first husband. I wasn't even her second. I stared at the divorce papers knowing I had no choice but to let her go. But even as I signed my name, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, how many more lives would Adriana shatter before her game finally caught up with her? Over the next few months, I unraveled her web of lies. Jean-Pierre in Paris, Marco in Rome, Stephen in Sydney. She didn't just have lovers, she had husbands, plural. At least 3 others that I could confirm, and who knew how many more. I thought about calling the police, but what could I even say? That my wife was living out a real-life soap opera? Instead, I hired a private investigator named Martin. He was an ex-cop who had seen it all, or so he thought. When I laid out Adriana's tangled web, even he looked impressed. "You sure you're ready for this?" he asked, flipping through surveillance photos of her with different men in different countries. "I need to know how deep this goes." And Martin delivered. Within 2 weeks, he uncovered property records in Madrid under the name Sofia Martinez, an apartment in Buenos Aires registered to Elena Vargas. Each alias had its own bank account, its own luxury lifestyle, and of course its own husband or fiancé. Madrid was the key. That's where she was now, according to Martin's latest report, and that's where I was headed. The flight to Madrid felt like the longest of my life. I spent the entire journey flipping through Martin's report, memorizing every detail. Adriana had rented a penthouse overlooking the city, complete with a terrace and a view of the royal palace. She was living the kind of life that most people only dreamed about, and I was determined to find out how. When I landed, I wasted no time. Martin had already staked out her building, and by the time I arrived, he handed me a dossier thick enough to choke a horse. Photos, receipts, surveillance logs, it was all there. "She's good," Martin said, "but not good enough." I watched her from a distance at first. She moved through Madrid like she owned it, her confidence unshakable. She shopped at designer stores, dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, and slipped into exclusive nightclubs without a second glance. But there was something else, something darker beneath the surface. She was watching her back. Everywhere she went, she glanced over her shoulder, her smile faltering just enough to reveal the cracks. Whatever game she was playing, she knew the stakes were high. And so did I. The moment came sooner than I expected. I followed her into a cafe, pretending to be just another tourist. She was seated near the window, sipping an espresso and scrolling through her phone. When our eyes met, her expression froze. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but sharp. I slid into the seat across from her and leaned in. "You tell me." Adriana's face hardened, then softened. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said. "You want the truth? Fine. I work for a covert agency." I scoffed, disbelief twisting in my stomach. "And what? Am I one of your contracts?" "No." Her voice cracked, trembling as though it might shatter. "I wanted a safe haven. You gave me that." "Did you love me?" I pressed, my voice harsher than I intended. She hesitated. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. "No. I just felt good with you. You're a good man. But it's time to stop." The words sliced through me. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the tiled floor. "You're just a liar. A cheater," I shouted, my voice echoing through the cafe. Heads turned, but I didn't care. I turned and stormed out, the cold air outside hitting me like a slap. But before I could take another step, a loud explosion rocked the street. Windows shattered, screams erupted, and the cafe behind me burst into chaos. I ducked instinctively, shielding my head as glass rained down. Adriana came running out, her face pale. "We have to go, now!" "What the hell is happening?" I demanded, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me toward a side alley. "They found me. I didn't mean for this to happen, but now you're in danger too." Sirens wailed in the distance. My heart pounded as I stumbled after her, my mind racing to process what was happening. "Who are they?" I asked, barely keeping pace. "The people I was running from. They don't care who gets hurt." Her eyes darted, scanning the alley as we ran. "You have to trust me now, even if you hate me." I stopped short, yanking my arm free. "Trust you? After you just admitted everything was a lie?" She stepped closer, desperation in her voice. "It wasn't all a lie. What I felt, what we had, I wanted it to be real. But we don't have time for this. Please." Gunshots rang out, ricocheting off the brick walls. I ducked and instinctively pulled her down with me. "We have to keep moving," she shouted, yanking me to my feet. I hesitated, but then ran after her, my mind reeling. This wasn't just heartbreak anymore. This was survival. and despite the betrayal, I couldn't let her face it alone. We ran until our breaths were ragged and the gunshots faded. Finally, she slowed, leaning against a wall to catch her breath. I looked at her, searching for answers in her tear-streaked face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For everything. For lying. For dragging you into this. I never meant to hurt you." "Then why did you?" My voice was quieter now, more tired than angry. She reached out but stopped short of touching me. "Because I didn't know how to stop. I thought I could have a normal life with you, but it was never real. Not for someone like me." Tears glistened in her eyes again. "You have to let me go. Don't look for me. It's the only way to keep you safe." I wanted to protest, but the weight of her words silenced me. She leaned in and kissed me softly, her lips trembling against mine. Then, before I could say anything, she turned and disappeared down the alley. I stood there for what felt like hours before finally walking away. When I got home, the silence felt heavier than ever. My apartment, once a refuge, now seemed foreign. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Her words, her touch, the way she ran. It was the most exciting story of my life, but it left a bitter taste of betrayal. I replayed her last words over and over, searching for hidden meanings, for hope. Was she protecting me, or just pushing me away? I stared at the framed photos we'd taken together, smiling, carefree moments that now felt like illusions. Was any of it real? The way she laughed, the late-night talks, the mornings we spent in bed when the world seemed far away? Or was it all just another part of her cover? I sat on the edge of my bed, my chest aching. I wanted to hate her, to erase her from my life, but I couldn't. She was etched into me now, part of my soul. Would I ever see her again? That question lingered like a ghost, haunting me through the night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to find peace. A week later, I saw the news. Riots had broken out in the very place we had run from, the explosion just the beginning of the chaos. Buildings were destroyed, and the streets were flooded with protests and violence. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. Had it all been a cover? A distraction so she could vanish without a trace? The thought made me sick. She had used me. She knew I had started piecing things together. About her past, about the men who had been following her. And she had run before I could confront her. I wasn't her safe haven. I was just a loose end she needed to tie up. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to hate her completely. Despite everything, I still wanted to believe there was a part of her that cared. That maybe, just maybe, she regretted leaving me like this. But I would never know. Not for sure. And that uncertainty haunted me more than the truth ever could.